Before we begin, take a moment to breathe. If you find value in stories that blend human emotion with timeless wisdom, consider subscribing to the channel. Your presence here supports mindful content in a noisy world. Now let us enter the story. Ethan had always considered himself a man of control, disciplined at work, punctual in his commitments, polite in conversation. As a project manager at a rising tech startup in San Francisco, he was constantly surrounded by intelligent minds and sleek machinery. To the outside world, he had it all: a six-figure salary, a loft apartment, and a beautiful wife named Lena, a freelance designer with a taste for silence and strong espresso. But control, it turns out, is a mask. And underneath Ethan's meticulous routines lay a secret that grew more compulsive with each passing night. At first it was harmless, or so he told himself. A glance at some adult content to unwind after a stressful day. A habit that turned into a ritual: noise-canceling headphones, browser in incognito mode, the blue glow of the laptop screen illuminating his face like a confessional booth. Lena, often immersed in her sketches or out at a yoga class, noticed nothing, at least not in the beginning. The intimacy between them began to erode slowly, subtly. Their sex life, once spontaneous and messy and warm, had cooled into polite kisses and uninspired, chore-like encounters. Ethan began to feel less drawn to Lena's realness, her occasional moodiness, the way she'd leave the almond milk out or forget to laugh at his jokes. Online, everything was curated, exaggerated, always ready to obey a click. One night, while Lena slept in the next room after a minor argument, Ethan found himself scrolling through an OnlyFans account of a woman who resembled one of his former college flings. He paid for a private video. As he watched, a mix of guilt and arousal surged through him like electricity. But when it ended, all that was left was the buzzing silence and the heavy beating of his heart. He didn't sleep that night, and the next day, as Lena brewed coffee and hummed to herself in the kitchen, Ethan looked at her with a strange ache, a mix of shame, longing, and something else he couldn't name. He didn't know it yet, but something fundamental had already broken. Lena wasn't blind. She was intuitive, sharp in the ways women often are when love begins to waver in the air. She had felt the shift, how Ethan's kisses no longer lingered, how his laughter was delayed, mechanical. She chalked it up to stress at first. After all, the tech world was brutal, and Ethan had been pulling long hours. But it wasn't just distance. It was avoidance. He wouldn't meet her eyes during dinner. He jumped when she entered the room unannounced. He took his phone into the bathroom more frequently, and his search history was always wiped clean. One evening after Lena had returned from a quiet walk through Golden Gate Park, she found Ethan sitting on the couch, staring at nothing. His laptop was closed, but the tension in the air clung to him like a guilty scent. "Are you okay?" she asked, gently, almost tenderly. He blinked, startled. "Yeah, just tired of me," she said before she could stop herself. There was a silence too long to be innocent. She stood frozen, watching him search for a lie that wouldn't come. That night, she called Nina. Nina had been her best friend since college and now worked as a clinical psychologist. Their friendship was the kind where you didn't need to explain the same pain twice. Over chamomile tea and soft sobs, Lena shared what she suspected, that Ethan was withdrawing, and that something darker may be at play. Lena listened carefully and spoke with unsettling calm. You know, emotional infidelity isn't always about another person. Sometimes it's about escaping intimacy altogether. Porn, fantasy. It creates the illusion of connection without the cost of vulnerability. Lena's heart dropped. The words struck too close. She had once thought of Ethan as her sanctuary. Now he felt like a stranger living in the same skin. The next day, she confronted him. Ethan didn't try to deny it. Maybe he was too tired. Maybe he was relieved. Yes, he said, eyes cast downward. I've been watching porn. A lot? Not just occasionally. It's every day, sometimes multiple times. I don't know why. It helps me escape. Lena felt like she'd been slapped, but instead of screaming, she stood still, struck by a calm more frightening than rage. For how long? She asked. A year. Maybe more. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of memories of the trips they took, the photos they posted, the anniversary dinners that now seemed like carefully arranged lies. And the real women? Did you ever... No, he interrupted quickly. Nothing physical. Just watching, paying, subscribing. Messages sometimes, but not more. That's not less, she said coldly. It's just different. Lena left that night, bags packed in 20 silent minutes. Ethan didn't try to stop her. He sat on the edge of the bed, stunned by how quiet the world felt without the soft chaos of her presence. The following weeks were worse than any punishment he could have imagined. He thought that without Lena, he'd be free to indulge fully, without guilt. But the opposite happened. He'd binged hours at a time, searching, scrolling, clicking, climaxing, collapsing. But it wasn't desire anymore. It was compulsion. It was anesthesia. And like all anesthetics, it began to wear off faster and faster. Soon, the images that once thrilled him began to disgust him. He felt fragmented, mentally foggy, emotionally numb, unable to concentrate. In meetings, he spaced out. At night, he lay in bed, exhausted but unable to sleep. His brain felt like it was running on broken circuits. He Googled the phrase, "Can porn addiction rewire your brain?" The results chilled him. The search led him into a rabbit hole of neuroscience. Words like dopaminergic fatigue, reward circuitry, and neuroplastic maladaptation stared back at him from academic articles and TED Talks. He watched a lecture by a neuroscientist from Cambridge who described how compulsive sexual behavior activates the same brain pathways as cocaine or methamphetamine. The message was clear. It wasn't just about morality. It was about neurology. Porn wasn't just a bad habit. It was a feedback loop, an endless cycle of stimulation, reward, and crash. With each exposure, his brain had adapted, reducing its sensitivity to natural sources of pleasure. Real intimacy now felt dull, distant. His prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for judgment, empathy, and self-regulation, wasn't firing like it used to. He wasn't broken. He was rewired. Ethan sat back from his desk and let out a long, ragged breath. Something deep in his chest ached, not just for Lena, but for something he couldn't name. A sense of inner peace that had vanished somewhere along the way. It wasn't about quitting porn anymore. It was about remembering how to feel again. At Nina's suggestion, Ethan signed up for a weekend meditation retreat, just outside the city. Run by a small Buddhist center nestled in the Redwood Hills, the retreat promised nothing dramatic, just silence, mindfulness, and the opportunity to observe the mind. He packed hesitantly, unsure of what to expect. A part of him still resisted the idea meditation seemed too quiet, too slow, too foreign to a man who'd spent years feeding his brain instant gratification. But something within him, a deeper voice, nudged him forward. And so one misty Friday morning, Ethan arrived at the retreat, left his phone in a wooden locker, and stepped into silence. The first few hours were agonizing. Ethan had assumed meditation would be peaceful. Instead, it was war, an internal one. The moment he sat down on the cushion and closed his eyes, a flood of images surged through his mind. Bodies, moans, flickering screens, regrets. He shifted restlessly, his legs aching, his breath uneven. The silence was loud. He opened his eyes and looked around the meditation hall. No one else seemed to be suffering. People sat like statues, their faces soft and calm. He felt like an imposter, but he stayed. On the second day, during a walking meditation through the towering redwoods, Ethan encountered the teacher, an elderly monk named Bhante Yoren, whose robes were faded and whose smile felt like warm stone. "You seem uncomfortable," the monk said gently, matching Ethan's pace. Ethan hesitated, then laughed bitterly. "Uncomfortable is generous." Bhante smiled. "What do you see when you close your eyes?" "Everything I want to forget." "And yet," the monk said, "it all returns because you never actually saw it. You only reacted. Meditation is not for escape. It is for meeting what has been running your life." That night, during a guided session on shamatha, or calm abiding, Ethan noticed something different. He wasn't being asked to stop his thoughts or erase his cravings. He was being invited to observe them. A fantasy arose, he didn't suppress it. Instead, he labeled it craving. He noted the sensation in his stomach, the tightness in his chest, the heat rising in his neck. And then something curious happened. It passed. No acting, no spiraling, just noticing. It was the first time in years he had sat with the feeling instead of fleeing from it. The following days were a slow undoing. Ethan began to notice patterns, not just in his thoughts, but in the way his body reacted to those thoughts. A particular scent, a posture of another retreat participant, a subtle flicker in his imagination. These would spark waves of arousal or anxiety. But now, instead of being swept away, he sat with them like a scientist, observing weather. He saw that craving wasn't constant. It had a beginning, a middle, and if left alone, an end. During a Dharma talk one afternoon, Bhante Yoren spoke softly but directly. "The mind intoxicated by images can never see clearly. What you consume becomes your mirror. If your eyes are filled with fantasy, how will you recognize truth when it stands before you?" Ethan felt pierced. These weren't just poetic words. They were a diagnosis. He remembered Lena's touch, warm, unfiltered, imperfect. He remembered how, over time, he began to compare her realness to his fantasies. She stopped exciting him, not because she changed, but because he had rewired himself to expect performance over presence. Later that evening, in a period of silent reflection, Ethan found himself crying. Not because he had lost Lena, but because he had lost himself long before she walked away. He realized the real betrayal wasn't what he had done to her. It was what he had done to his own capacity for love. On the final day of the retreat, Bhante Yoren offered a simple list 6 meditative techniques that Ethan would carry home like tools in a weathered bag. They weren't magic. They were methods. And in a world addicted to shortcuts, they were slow medicine. 6 techniques to rewire your brain from porn addiction. 1. Scan the body. Notice early signs of craving in the body before they become action. 2. Label the urge. Name the thought or craving without judgment. Craving, fantasy, habit. 3. Breathe. Use slow, conscious breathing to anchor your awareness when temptation arises. 4. Visualize the aftermath. Mentally walk through the emotional cost before giving in. 5. Digital silence. Schedule time away from screens to let your nervous system reset. 6. Self-compassion. Practice loving kindness toward yourself, especially the part that feels broken. Back in San Francisco, Ethan's life didn't magically transform overnight. There were relapses, nights when the old habits crept back like shadows, when loneliness screamed louder than mindfulness. But now he had a map, a way forward. He reached out to Lena, not with demands or apologies, but with honest presence. They began attending couples therapy, unraveling the wounds together, learning how to rebuild trust. Ethan also joined a meditation group where stories like his were not met with judgment, but with quiet compassion. His brain, once hijacked by dopamine floods, began to recalibrate. Real connection, with its unpredictability and imperfection, started to regain its power. Ethan learned that the mind is like a river, sometimes turbulent, sometimes calm. Meditation was the steady boat that let him navigate without drowning. If this story touched something within you, share it with someone who may need it too. Subscribe for more narratives where ancient wisdom meets the struggles of modern life. And remember, sometimes the greatest clarity comes after we lose everything we thought mattered.